Well, very good. All right, so last album of the evening, we are covering the Pixies' "Doolittle," and in the opening montage, you heard a clip from "Gouge Away," and now you're going to hear a clip from "Debasa." All right, sorry. I can't just say the title. I have to say it like that.
Yeah,
you know, that's just how it
like
is.
Black
So
Francis.
that's right. All right, so Pixies' "Doolittle" comes in at number 2 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 1 of 1989, number 18 of overall albums. It is the Pixies' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, also making Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 141. And the Pixies rank, let's see, number 17 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So covered them last week. We're covering them again, but this time we're going to do a little bio. So this is their second studio album that was recorded just over a couple weeks, I think 3 weeks, between October and November of 1988, and it was released on April 17th, 1989. And this record is considered by many to be their best, also kind of their most accessible as well. Some people say that as well. So the origins of the band go back to 1983, when Charles Thompson, who would later become known as Black Francis, but at this time he's actually Black Francis is his stage name, and I think I saw that in the documentary I was watching, the band members were still referring to him as Charles, so I don't think he's going by Black or Frank or Francis or any of that stuff. He's Charles to the people that know him and love him. So. But so Thompson, he met Joey Santiago in their dorm at UMass Amherst. Santiago introduced Thompson to David Bowie, and Thompson also started developing a love for the Cars. It was an influence on him at this time, and the two of them would listen to music together and occasionally jam. Santiago came from the Philippines. And Thompson, actually, I found out, graduated from the same high school that my wife went to in Westport, Massachusetts. He was only there for 1 year. He had spent some time in Marblehead on the North Shore, but then he moved to Westport for his senior year. And so, yeah, that high school is still standing. It is old as shit, so it probably needs a new school there in Westport. But I thought that was interesting. So in 1984, Thompson goes to Puerto Rico as part of an exchange program, and he started to get the itch to start a band, and he wrote Santiago a letter while he was there, basically saying, hey, when I get back, we got to make this happen. We got to get the band going. So Santiago agreed, and when Thompson came back, they dropped out of college and they moved to Boston, and they worked in a warehouse for a period of time while Thompson started writing songs. And then in 1986, they placed an ad in the paper seeking a bass player, and this is where, John, your tidbit of information there comes into play here. That's where they basically said, we want a bass player who likes both Peter, Paul, and Mary and Husker Du, and also no experience necessary, no experience required. So this ad was answered by one person, Kim Deal. She responded to the ad. She was actually a guitar player, never really played the bass before, but when she met Thompson and Santiago, she decided that she liked the songs enough that she went out and got herself a bass, and they started rehearsing in her apartment. So she joins the band. Kim Deal then flew her sister Kelly out to Boston. They were originally from Ohio, the Deal sisters. And that she flew Kelly out to Boston to audition as the drummer. And while Thompson approved of her being in the band, Kelly Deal did not feel confident with her drumming skills, and she opted not to join the band. But Kim Deal's husband then suggested that they hire his friend David Lovering to be the drummer, and so that's how he came along. So the four-piece was now formed. The band's name came from Santiago, who just essentially picked it randomly from the dictionary. I think, who did that as well? There was another band that I'm just trying to think of. Was it the Grateful Dead? I remember them going through the dictionary and trying to find a name for themselves. I think that was Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead. So he liked the way that Santiago liked the way that the name sounded, and also liked the definition of them being, quote, mischievous little elves. So they went on to become the Pixies, and they went on to rehearse in Lovering's parents' garage. And David Lovering is from Burlington, Massachusetts, which is the town over from me. So the Pixies basically were practicing right outside my front door for a period of time. So a lot of connections with
not that
with
you
my
were
life.
there, but...
Not that I was there, but I'm sure it's that house is still standing. So they started playing some shows in the Boston area where they were noticed by a producer by the name of Gary Smith. And he loved them so much that he told them he would not sleep until that they were all famous. And then they went on to record a 17-track demo, which later became known to fans as the Purple Tape because it had a purple cover on the tape. So a local promoter by the name of, it's either Ken Goes or Ken Goes, G-O-E-S, became their manager, and he passed the demo along to Ivo Watts Russell of the independent label 4AD. And Watts Russell initially was going to pass on it until he was convinced to do otherwise by his girlfriend, which I don't think that's the first time we've heard that, like other people like deciding to take on acts because their significant other convinced them to do so. So that
I think
was the case
Ivo
here.
Watts Russell has come up before too. That name sounds familiar.
Could be.
I'll look. Yeah.
Look it up, Josh. So they then went on to record an EP where they just essentially took 8 tracks from the Purple Tape, and they recorded those in a more professional setting for the EP called Come On Pilgrim, and that was released in September of 1987. And for that record, that's when Thompson decided to officially change his name to a stage name, Black Francis. Sometimes he would invert it, calling himself Frank Black. And this name came from his father, who had said for several years that if he ever had another son, he would name him Black Francis. So that's where that comes from. So their first full-length album was Surfer Rosa, which we covered last week. This was produced by Steve Albini. It was recorded in 2 weeks and released in March of 1988. Met with a fairly positive reaction, particularly in Europe, and it was eventually certified gold in 2005. So it took quite some time for them to sell 500,000 copies. But they at that time, I think their distribution deal was mostly centered in the UK, so they had a hard time getting records out in the US. So after that record, they did sign with an American distribution deal with Elektra Records, and they also started a relationship up with British producer Gil Norton, and he is the one that produced Doolittle for their second record. And for this record, they were given $40,000 to make the album, which was, while it's not a lot of money for a major label, it was actually 4 times the amount of money that they had available for Surfer Rosa. So this record is known for being more produced or having a cleaner sound than Surfer Rosa does. And the sessions like this, like I said, lasted for 3 weeks, and they generally were producing a song a day, but recording and tracking a song a day. Norton was making several suggestions regarding some changes that he wanted to make to the songs. They were not always welcomed by Frank Black, and he and some of the suggestions that he had were to actually make some of the songs longer, because there's many short songs on this record. And then Black Francis responded when they were out one day in a record store. He picked up a copy of a Buddy Holly album, gave it to Norton, and said, "If it's good enough for Buddy Holly, it's good enough for us." So he decided that, no, I'm not going to make some of these songs longer than what they are, and they're going to be what they are. So
Matt, Ivo Watts Russell is the label that he owned that the Cocteau Twins were on, and he worked and produced their albums that we talked about.
There you go. That's how you knew that, Josh.
Also, Dead Can Dance, John. Funnily enough.
Oh, wow. Okay.
3 pretty different albums.
Yeah.
So during the recording of this record, that's when tensions between Black Francis and Kim Deal started to become more apparent. The reports were that during the recording of this, it really wasn't all that fun. It used to be fun when they were in their earlier years, but it was becoming more work. They had become exhausted from the touring that they were doing and the fact that they essentially released 3 albums in 2 years. And soon after the tour for Doolittle, they announced that they were going on a break. So we'll pick up more of the bio. I think we're going to cover them in the 90s on a full bio, so we can stop there. But as far as this record goes, the themes, one of the main themes in here was surrealism. And in 1989, Black Francis expressed how this influenced his songwriting by saying that, quote, "I got into avant-garde movies and surrealism as an escape from reality. To me, surrealism is totally artificial. I recently read an interview with the director David Lynch, who said he had ideas and images, but that he didn't know exactly what they meant. That's how I write." So if you don't know what Black Francis is writing about, that's okay. He doesn't either. Some of the other themes that you might find in this record include environmental catastrophe, biblical stories, and death and destruction. Originally, Francis wanted the album to be called Whore, but decided to change that after thinking that there might be some backlash from it, so they called it Doolittle after one of the lines in one of the songs. Initial sales of this record were pretty slow. They did pick up with college radio. The album did eventually go gold in 1995 and platinum in 2018. So just kind of solidifying the Pixies' reputation as being a very, kind of a cult band, very influential to a lot of other bands, kind of similar along the lines of like the Velvet Underground. They were more popular, I think, more in the UK. But as years went on, they just their legacy grew and grew, and we can talk a little bit more about that about when we cover their next record, do the bio. But yeah, when they reunited in 2004, the tour like sold out super quickly, and it was a big success for them. So very popular record, very influential band, and I am curious as to what you guys think. So. Who goes first here? Is this is a
This
John
one's
take
mine,
first.
I believe.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So first, I have a question for you guys because I see the Spotify plays on this, and there's a lot of big Pixie songs on this, right? Debaser, Wave of Mutilation, Monkey Goes to Heaven, Gouge Away, Here Comes Your Man. But Hey has the second most clips, so it has to have been in like some sort of Netflix show.
It's also really high on Amazon. I was wondering that as well.
There has to be something because it's probably the 7th most known song on this album, and yet stream wise, it's almost as much as Here Comes Your Man. So I'm like, that usually is like this song has been on something. So I don't know what, but I thought I'd throw that out there just in case.
I can look it up, John, while you talk. I didn't see anything in my initial, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Pixies album that I wanted. And Surfer Rosa left me wanting a little bit, but this album's just strong from start to finish. I mean, lyrically, it's nothing, right? And I have no idea what. But I love REM too, and sometimes REM's a little bit lyrically is nothing, right? But sonically, this hits my palate in all the ways I want it to. I do miss a little bit of Kim Deal singing on this. It's all Black Francis all the time.
I would agree too.
And I would like a little bit more Kim Deal singing, but I know that was the result of the power trip a little bit. But in terms of as a band and musically, I thought this was a step up from the first album. It starts off great. I have a great Debaser song, and that they opened up, or story, I should say, and that they opened up sort of an alternative rock club in Trenton, my native Trenton, in the mid 2000s, so around like 2004-ish. And I could definitely remember this place was playing like great 80s music, right? So it's like Sonic Youth, Pixies, Cure, Smiths, all that stuff. And I could definitely remember that, right at that threshold when you go from, drinking to getting a little bit buzzed to going, a little bit more than getting buzzed, right? You're getting drunk. I can remember going into the bathroom and coming out of the bathroom while Debaser was playing, and it was like something out of a movie, right? Like where, like, it gets a little hazy, right? And you've got like Frank Black, and that's why it was so funny when Matt screamed it, because it's like, that's what you're hearing, but, entering a state of being out of it. So that song always reminds me a little bit of that. But what a great song that is. Wave of Mutilation's an awesome song. I mean, Here Comes Your Man it's got to be one of the big two, right? Like along with Where Is My Mind, in terms of songs you would know from the Pixies, even if you didn't know it. Monkey Goes to Heaven. But then there's some great deep cuts like Mr. Greaves on here, which I love. And I do like the second song, Team, quite a bit as well. The first like around 8 songs are a little stronger than the back half of 7 songs,
I would
but
agree.
not in a way that's pronounced, right? It's just sort of like they come out of the gate firing those first 10 songs. I also appreciate the fact that the songs are so brief. It reminds me a little bit conceptually, guys, of what Wire did on that one album we covered, Pink Flag.
Yeah.
Remember, where it was just these little bursts of like 2-minute songs, and I was very, very high on that album. I know that album was in my top 10 of the 70s, and this album reminded me of that album a little bit, that there's all these just little snippets that intrigue you throughout the entire album, and putting them together makes a real solid mosaic of the Pixies sound. But yeah, I'm very high on this album. This is one of the better alternative rock albums we've listened to in the 80s. And I mean, we're gonna do more, right? But this to me, so many of the songs that I think of as peak or vintage Pixies are disproportionately on this album. That this is the one that I say pick up if you don't go the greatest hits route, which I always prefer getting the albums over the greatest hits. But this is the one that I think you need to grab. Now we'll cover others, so I'll reserve my right to change my mind after a listen after a while. But even in my remembrance of the Pixies, I not that Surfer Rosa was a bad album, but I feel like this was just such a step up from that album. This is what pushes them into that legendary band category, as opposed to just solid, alt rock band. So
Yeah.
strong thumbs up for me.
Do you think it's the number 2 album of the 80s? It's like based on best ever
I mean,
albums.
I'll do my. I don't know. 2 is very, very high. It's one of my favorite rock albums, though, of the 80s.
It used
I don't
to be
think
one,
it's.
by the way. I think
wow.
when we
I don't
started the
think
80s,
it's,
this was number 1.
I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that this might end up. This has a good chance of ending up in my top 10 albums of the 80s.
Yeah.
So it rises to that level. And most of the albums in that, in terms of my scoring, right, I go up to 60. Most of those albums in that top 10 are going to fall between 57 and 60 in terms of composite score. So
Yeah.
that gives you an idea how well I feel it is. Yeah. Or how good it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I also enjoyed this album, although I don't think it's I think it's comparable to Surfer Rosa in a lot of ways. I didn't feel like it's such a transcendent step up in the way that Licensed Till and Paul's Boutique are, but I feel like it highlights whatever the magic is that the Pixies have that kind of make them special and influential, and they have a really good way of writing these. They have a rough edge to them. There's still kind of there's a lot of hardcore punk sensibility to some of their songs. Like in Tame, there's some yelling that's pretty abrasive, and Crackety Jones is kind of more like a punk song than anything else in my mind. But I feel like despite those things, and I think that's part of the appeal for me too, is that they write really strong kind of melodic songs that coupled with Kim Deal's singing when she's on here just works really well. I feel like I hear this album and I can't help but think of all these other bands. I know we've said this a lot about a lot of other albums, but this album in particular seems like a lot of other bands that we will talk about or have talked about. I'm thinking of The Clash. Mr. Greaves, I thought for sure was a Clash song. I was trying to see if it was a cover, but it wasn't. Or Here Comes Your Man, which is kind of the song on the last album, is so kind of unlike the rest of the album, and it's so singular and so appealing. It's maybe I think it's probably one of the best songs of the 80s. I would put it up there if we had to break it out that much. But that's almost in some ways a replacement song. I feel like with the writing that they had on that album, and kind of their use of melody and sound,
that's a very good point. That it does sound like a replacement song.
Yeah. And then the one band that really I feel like
it's got some ways, the Bastards of Young in particular.
Yep.
The more I think about it, yeah.
Yeah, which is a song I really like. I feel like Weezer must have been really influenced by them. That song Wave of Mutilation has the same like exact guitar sound and singing sound that a lot of their songs do, like especially on Pinkerton or the Green album, maybe the Blue album too. They must have heard them, and I feel like they kind of run. I mean, they're not too long after this, I guess, really, but like 5 years or something. But that just stuck out to me every time I heard that song. Listening, it just reminded me of them. It's interesting, Matt, that you brought up the whole surrealism aspect to that, because I picked up on that from the first song with the reference to Un Chien Andalou, which is a Buñuel short movie that he did with Salvador Dali, and with the cutting eyeball with the razor is kind of like the infamous shot of that, and Dali's kind of, and Buñuel are surrealistic kind of hallmarks, and the David Lynch thing makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I feel like I didn't pay a lot of attention to the lyrics on this album because a lot of the songs, they don't mean anything. The themes are so like disparate from one song to the next. But despite it, and I think this album is a little takes a little knock for me because Kim Deal isn't featured as prominently as much, and I feel like I really like her, and I feel like she brings something special. When I heard her on Surfer Rosa, and I feel like if she had been on this album more, it would have been higher for me in my estimation, at least compared to their other album. But yeah, this has a strange mix of melody and abrasiveness and a strange appeal that I can see why, it's influential, but I really like it, and I really kind of like the chemistry that this band brings to music. So thumbs up for me for sure.
Yeah, so just to point out, Here Comes Your Man was written by Black Francis when he was 15 in high school. Yeah, they put this on there because like I don't know if it was the producer or somebody from the record label or somebody was talking about accessibility or whatever and he's like, well, I got this. Yeah, so that's kind of and
Mission
I think
accomplished.
Yeah, and I think Santiago contributed to that because I think he did like that surfer. It's like a surfer guitar kind of part that's happening there, and he was kind of the one that kind of threw that part in there and give it a little bit of a catchier hook. So so that stands out there. Yeah, this record is really good, to say the least, and yeah. I think it is stronger than Surfer Rosa. I don't know, John. I don't know if I draw that much of a distinction between the two. I think this has more. I think there's more stronger songs on this than maybe on Surfer Rosa. Like, to me, there's like 5 or 6 just killers on this, and the one that stands out the most to me that I didn't really like think about. I mean, I knew Debaser, Here Comes Your Man, Wave of Mutilation, Monkeys Gone to Heaven, but two of them that stand. And Hey, that doesn't surprise me that Hey is a popular song in there, because that's a great song. But Gouge Away kind of stood out to me as being like a song that I wasn't as familiar with, and
that's a big Pixies song, though.
And it didn't, for whatever reason, in my mind and in my experience, like it didn't fall in line with some of the others. For whatever reason, I just wasn't as familiar with it. But man, that guitar part is awesome. And the one that really stood out as kind of being a deeper cut was Number 13 Baby. Like that's one of my favorite songs on this record, and so I hear what you guys are saying about Kim Deal maybe not singing as much, but where she stands out to me is the bass. The bass is, talk about just being forefront in so many different songs and just kind of driving the melody and being the catalyst for so many of these songs.
He may have stolen her songs, but he doesn't steal her bass in terms of the production. So I'll give him that. He doesn't push that back.
No, she's right out there, and sometimes it's the only thing that you're hearing. And that's one of the things that I came up in the research, and I didn't really think about this listening, but when I read it and then I put it together with it, I was like, it makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that people say is so great about this record, it's not just what they are doing, it's what they're not doing, because there is space you know, on this record. And it's like, and there's parts of the songs where, you know, people are like, oh, you know, I think that this is where they would come in and do this big thing, or like bring all these instruments together, and they actually kind of like reserve it and kind of come back. And I do hear that, right? Like there's parts on here where they're not rocking it, they're not doing a big full guitar sound, they're not going to the next level, they're not building it up, they're kind of just reserving and setting it back and letting some space kind of, you know, kind of encapsulate parts of the song. So I thought that was kind of an interesting take, and I see what people
most
were saying
notably
with
Monkey
that.
Gone to Heaven and Wave of Mutilation are good examples of that. Yeah, the space, and you know, you can hear a thrashing guitar solo on Wave of Mutilation, an alternate version of that song, but yeah, they do it more.
And I think in a lot of the
restrained.
songs, I think a lot of songs too, and somebody was saying, you know, it kind of it builds the tension, like it and it's like, yeah, it's kind of. So it's interesting when you kind of, for me anyway, when I read that and I went back and listened to it more, I'm like, yes, I totally see that. So it's kind of interesting that other people kind of bring things to your attention that you were always knew were there, but you never knew to put it together in that, quite in that way. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would say, oh, the first half stands out so much more to me, because I think some of my favorite songs are in the second half. I think Silver's a really interesting song. I mean, that's just. I mean, Kim Deal singing on that. She and Francis are doing like a duet kind of in a very high pitched and non-traditional, you know, kind of way. It's kind of creepy and eerie, but man, that's an interesting song. And that's just this. This band takes traditional, like straight ahead rock music, and then they just contort it and twist it and throw in these quirky things, and they throw in these menacing things, and they throw in these screaming lyrics that like are abrasive but also somehow fit in together. And then they kind of do like a little poppier thing, or they do a little goofy thing like La La Love You, which is like, you know, just kind of, that stands out as being like this kind of goofy one-off. But the more you listen to it, the more you're like, no, that's a pretty interesting song that just like you don't really hear, even though there are a lot of other bands kind of took this and ran with it and made it like the sound of the 90s in some ways. But there's still things on
That
here
sounds
that are
like
just like
Pulp. La La Love You sounds like Jarvis Cocker
oh yeah
and Pulp. Yeah,
okay, I'm not as familiar with them, but it's a lot of different things happening all at once. It's similar to the Beastie Boys, but also in a different way, because it's just obviously they're obviously not sampling anything, but it's just things that you wouldn't think that ordinarily would kind of go together. And then the more you listen to it, the more you see into it, it just grows on you. So yeah, really good album, really great band. So thumbs up from me.
And the drums are very rudimentary on this album, I'd like to say too. There's a lot of just pounding the drums, like and cymbals, you know, at the end of different things, and then pretty standard like drum beats, you know, like
There's some
nothing
cool
overly
fills though.
complicated.
Like yeah, he's not
There
like
are, but the drums, what I'm saying is the drums exist, right, to complement the rest of this. I would not say this is.
it's not it's not a drumming album. No, I would agree
No.
with that. No, this
No, it's a guitar album, is
Yeah.
what this album is
and
in its
bass.
core.
I was that's
Well, I
what
consider
was,
the
you know.
bass the guitar. You know, I mean, yeah, guitar and bass if you want to
Yeah.
tease them out. But I say guitar being, you know, guitar, lead, rhythm, bass. That's when I say guitar album.
And
I mean, all
that's
this,
some of my favorite parts is when they just, because I think number 13 Baby, they do that gouge away, like they just come in when they do those like really full guitar chords, and it's like, and they're bombastic, and then they pull back. And that's actually that's the name of the documentary that I was watching. It's called Loud Quiet Loud, and that's what I think that's what Kurt Cobain was saying when he was like, oh, you know, so I was trying to ape that from the Pixies, is kind of like do something quiet and then build it up and then bring it back down, and like kind of going back, the back and forth nature of that was something that was very appealing for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, all good points. I mean, it sounds like we're all really high on this album.
Yeah, I saw them do this. I've seen the
Yeah, I
Pixies
really
three
like this
times.
one.
I've seen them 3 times now, and one time they did this entire album. That was at Orlando Calling. They did the Orlando. That's the one and only time they did Orlando Calling, the music festival in Orlando, and they played this. That was the tour that they were playing this entire record.
This is around the time when they played their set list in alphabetical order, right? Wasn't that a thing they did a lot? If I remember
Oh, I didn't
correctly?
read that part. No,
I believe they
could
used to
have.
play their. Yeah, they used to do a lot of stuff like that, and I'm pretty sure they used to play this album in alphabetical order.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
So did you find, Matt, where this might have come from, the popularity
Oh
of Hey?
yeah, I don't think it's what you would have thought, but this says that Hey was from, let's see, I don't know if this is a movie, Fear Street Part 1.
It would be a Netflix show.
Okay, The Equalizer,
I told you, Netflix, man. You see heavy streams, Netflix.
maybe Gold, which is I don't know if that's a movie. Zach and Miri Make a Porno from 2008, and it's also from How I Met Your Mother. It was in one of those episodes.
I found a reference that might be the answer.
Okay.
And
The holy grail of this?
It brings us back full circle to our initial discussion of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Wow.
It's from the movie Suicide Squad in 2021, directed by James Gunn of Guardians of the Galaxy, and another soundtrack, also starring John Cena and Margot Robbie and Idris Elba, and a soundtrack of a lot of hits like that. So I'm guessing that might be where it came out on HBO Max when the pandemic was happening. So
there you go.
And that makes sense because the amount of streams would have to be recent. Yeah. So there we go. Well, and